Hi everyone and welcome to the Newsagent podcast. I'm Susie Lysett, Senior Content Executive at Goodlord, and for this episode I'm joined once again by Ricky Purdy, Director of Lettings at Dawsons. So thanks for joining me again, Ricky.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the request and the offer to come along again. Enjoyed last time, and hopefully we can shed some light on where we're all at the moment in this call.
Exactly. Well, today we are going to be talking once again about the Renting Homes Wales Act 2016. We talked about this back in April, I think it was, just before the original deadline for the Act, not knowing, of course, that would be pushed back to December. So we're reconvening now just to see how things have advanced since then. We'll also dip into the impact of some of the recent economic uncertainty on the Welsh lettings market as well. But first off, Ricky, I know that you've contributed to some of our blogs before. You've obviously been on the podcast before, but for the listeners that don't know who you are, if you could tell us a bit about you and a bit about Dawsons just to kick us off, that'd be great.
Of course, yeah. So my name's Ricky, so I'm the Director of Lettings here at Dawsons. We're an agency based in South Wales. We've got quite a good geographical reach. We've got a sales department, we've got our lettings department, auction, land and new homes, and the commercial teams that work very, very well together. We've got a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of presence in the areas we cover. So that stands us in good stead for sort of client interaction, retention, and sort of business from one aspect of our business to the other, in terms of landlords will become tenants and tenants will become buyers and sellers and so on. So, we try to provide that all-round service, and hopefully that's what we do. We do well, and it's enjoyed by those that we interact with. So that's us as an agency. We've recently got our training arm as well, which is Dawsons Training Wales. That's a relatively new addition to our armoury, and that's 3 years near enough now in the making, and is there to have agents and landlords that self-manage, compliant with what we need to do in Wales under the Rent Smart Wales requirements, which will also help and support landlords and agents as we get into December the 1st and the Renting Homes Wales Act. So both of them are very, very much interlinked and important to what we do and those clients that we work for.
That's a good example of, finding different ways to diversify your service in your offering, I suppose, at the minute. I guess there's a lot of uncertainty, as I've already mentioned. So it's good to see different opportunities that are out there, I guess, for different agents.
Yeah, no, I think and it's taken a slightly different turn in recent years. We've predominantly looking toward that private sort of landlord sector, where landlords would be self-managing and need to abide by the rules and regulations and have a license and certain criteria to gain that license. So that's, a big core of the people that we train and support and sort of, use our training arm on a regular basis and renew with us as well 5 yearly, which is really nice. That, residual business, that loyalty and that sort of trusted sort of relationship is key for us. But we also spend a lot of time now, and we put a lot of training towards other agents within agency. So whilst you could argue that's the competition that we're supporting, we don't look at it that way. We just want to sort of increase that sort of standard of property and the industry within Wales. We provide training to people that we compete with geographically, but an awful lot of agents within agencies throughout Wales and across the bridge as well, with England's agents that have properties that they manage in Wales as well. So yeah, definitely an avenue that we benefit from, but we make sure our clients do as well.
No, that's fantastic. And I think that, this aspect of training, the Renting Homes Wales Act 2016 just is one example of how much things can change within the industry and why training is so necessary. I mean, obviously, this particular piece of legislation, it was originally expected to come into play on the 15th of July, I believe, earlier this year. It's pushed back, as I say, to the 1st of December 2022. A bit of a delay there. But before we get into what that meant, how much it helped and so on, perhaps if I could ask you just to give a bit of an overview really as to what the Renting Homes Wales Act is, what's going to be changing for the industry.
Everything is probably the easiest sort of and quickest answer to that. So usually from a Welsh perspective, all that we know within agency in terms of terminology, phraseology, some rules, requirements, timelines, physical paperwork, processes and systems are all different. So, we were getting as prepared as we could do for July, which is when that initial sort of date was coming in for implementation. That's been put back until December the 1st. So it did give us and the industry in Wales a little bit more time to prepare. Some would still argue not quite enough, because there are still, one or two things to be reaffirmed and confirmed, and some key points were only confirmed and sort of reaffirmed in recent weeks. So fundamentally, tenancies change. What is an AST, as we all know it, will become an occupation contract. Tenants will become occupation contract holders. Notice periods will go from 2 months to 6 months for what is the equivalent of a Section 21 as we know it now. And yeah, it's just a sort of a completely different approach to all things that is rental. So it's looking to level up and sort of balance the industry between landlord and tenant. Some say that will get achieved. Some say that will be the case from the outset. Some will say the opposite, and it's already a little favourable to one over the other, and that might enhance it. So it's going to be different. It's going to take a lot of getting used to, and that isn't going to happen overnight from December. I think possibly 2023 as a calendar year will be a sort of an educational time frame for all of us in the industry, just to make sure that we can get as familiar with that as we are with all things tenancy now. So a lot of changes in terms of what we have to adhere to as an agency, and as landlords that self-manage, and for tenants to get used to. Social housing, that's involved in it as well, and they have sort of the rules and regulations to sort of become accustomed to as well. So lots to get used to, and from an agency's point of view, lots of daily things that we take for granted, our processes and protocols, and how we interact between departments and qualify tenants and draw up tenancy agreements and look at notice periods and how we communicate with tenants and landlords across a 12-month period. That all has to change, really, and will change from December in one format. But we've also got a second set of changes that we need to put in place, ready to get us over December. So it's what we do now that, as an agent and as landlords, more so than the tenants, have to make sure is in place as we transition from November the 30th to December the 1st, when the law becomes sort of in place, versus anything that we do from that point onward for new tenants or renewals or new engagement with clients. So it's a bit of a parallel sort of two lane sort of process at the moment. But yeah, so in short, all that we know changes in some format.
It's an interesting delineation. Obviously, the point of the 1st of December, it doesn't mean that's once you've reached that deadline, you've got everything in place and you can sit back and relax. It's something that you obviously need to stay quite vigilant on and ensure that all the new tenancies that are created, they're obviously in line with the new processes, in line with the new legislation. So yeah, it is interesting. It's obviously going to be a bit of an ongoing process to make sure that everything's in line.
It will be that, and I think that's are we prepared as an agency, as agencies, as an industry? I think we're as prepared as we can be, with so many things still relatively new to lots of people, and some things still with some uncertainty, and we need some precedent set before people can be firm or fast on some activities. But yes, we've had more time than we would have if July 15th was the date that came about. Life will be a little easier from December, because we only have one element of things to do from that point onwards, whereas at the moment we've got to deal with things that are transitional between now and then, as well as the things thereafter. So we have our day-to-day jobs to do. It's a busy market. It's an interesting time, as we'll touch on later, in terms of where we are sort of economic climate related and whatnot. So we've got that to do as a very busy agency or industry, as well as getting used to all of our changes, which some will argue is a full-time job in itself, that preparation. So it is difficult, and it's taken some doing, and we're far from there yet. I'd lie if I said we were. We've got that 34, 5, 6 days ahead of us to sort of to make sure we're as ready as we need to be. But yes, it's a challenge.
And some of the aspects that we touched on last time, or an aspect of the new act, it is going to be around the maintenance, the safety certificates, and so on that need to be up to date. Have the extra, what has it been, extra 4.5 months or so? Have they given time to work on that? Do you feel more comfortable that perhaps, I think that we discussed before that there was actually an issue in booking the appropriate people to come in and make these checks and things? Has that given you time?
It has, I suppose. It's not fixed the problem, and it's, I think quite a few people took their foot off the gas, in June when that sort of day was being put back, and then sort of hit the ground again with a little bit more of a run 1 or 2 months after that. That information was put our way. But so yes, we've got more done than we would have if we hadn't had that extension. But there's lots of factors. We've still got a 12-month grace period thereafter to accommodate lots of things if things are dealt with correctly beforehand. And you've got still got maybe a sort of a bottleneck of tradesmen. You've got the associated costs that are very difficult for some landlords to fund, as well as all of the things that we all know are ongoing at the moment. So has it helped? Yes, of course it has. Are people still cautious and a little apprehensive? Yes. Will it mean that life is easier for what is the applicable 12 months, December to December, rather than July to July? Yes, it will. But we haven't done the pro rata amount between July and December that we will probably do from December to June next year, just because it hasn't got that impetus. There's still a bit of uncertainty, what was needed, what wasn't needed in terms of timelines. And also lots of landlords and tenants unsure of their time at the moment. Were they going to still be landlords and tenants? They were looking to buy or maybe looking to exit the market, and therefore it was work and expenses that were not needed. So, we're overcoming that week by week because it's still a lot of uncertainty for people. So it has helped, of course it has. And, we'll take that because we need all the help and sort of boxes ticked as we can.
Or talking about landlords sort of potentially looking at selling up and therefore not wanting to make these changes. Again, one of the aspects that we discussed previously, it was the fact that Section 21, kind of as we know it, will change. 6-month notice periods will come into play. Have you seen any? I think that when we spoke before, your experience had been that landlords weren't necessarily leaving the market in droves. It was sort of business as usual. Is that still the same? Is that still that trend still continuing?
I think it's probably not to the extent thankfully as we always hoped and predicted it would be. I think it's may have prolonged the process in terms of what was likely to be decisions that people had to make in July or between July and the end of this year. They now know they've got some grace on. So if there are intentional landlords that are here for the long run, yes, it's still a very good time to be a landlord, if not the best time to be a landlord. In terms of the void periods are lower than they've ever been. The rents are very, very higher than they've ever been in certain instances and geographical areas that are national as well as what we cover. Caliber of tenants again is as high as it can be in terms of there are the supply and demand sort of puts that into the forefront of decision making. So for those landlords who are landlords and intend to be landlords, then they know it hasn't had a great impact because they're into longer periods of time that tenants are prepared to commit to rather than maybe obliged to commit to, which is giving them reassurance, and that's important. As long as the financial element of things, as we've touched on before the call, is still sustainable in terms of increased mortgage sort of payments and outgoings that can be sort of reflected in rents within reason. So it's still financially practical and feasible for a landlord to have X amount of properties. Then, so no, they've not been put off by it. It's maybe that the sort of more reluctant or accidental landlords or landlords that were non-intentional that are now weighing up their options. Is it financially sustainable over 12 months, looking at the cost of living, the increased mortgage costs, interest rates, and so on the back of spending money for certification that they didn't need to do before and committing to 12 months. So you can look at that positively or not. The positives are clear for people to see, great level of tenants, a good caliber of tenants, very low void periods, high rents, and there is still, good capital in the properties that they are renting or choosing to put to tenants. You could look at the opposite, and the negatives then would be prolonged commitments, more expense, and sort of increased outgoings. And depending on which side of the fence you're on is where you'll be governed by. But no, in short, there hasn't been mass exodus. There hasn't been lots of landlords exiting. We sort of hope that would be the case. Education, conversation, communication to talk about the positives has helped us, retain our portfolio and increase it truthfully, which is great. but maybe, there isn't that conversation or reassurance that that new landlords or recent landlords have that could take positives from.
And actually on that point, in terms of that differentiation between the accidental landlords and those that intended to always be landlords and are in it for the long run, I suspect that the intentional ones will likely to have a bigger portfolio and therefore will have perhaps more things to transfer over to this new way of doing things. How would you advise agents who are perhaps having those conversations with their landlords to have those discussions with the different type of landlord that you do have to manage? If you have a large portfolio, then doing everything is perhaps going to be a different conversation.
It is, yeah, but I think it's just knowing your customers, knowing the clients that are experienced, larger, more longer standing clients as landlords and tenants for that matter, because it's daunting and it's a change for them, which we need to make sure that they're comfortable and reassured by as well. So it's just taking each case on merit and sort of understanding, if a landlord's got 10 properties, there's a lot more things for them to sort of make sure are lined up ready for or before December. And that's what we're here for as a good agent. We want to sort of strike that balance of making it as easy and as simple for the clients as possible, taking that worry and burden away from them, not doing that in a condescending or patronizing way that could be perceived as the case, but also not overly simplifying it and taking the importance away from things as well. So that balance between sort of informing and having clients understand the importance and the urgency of doing what we need to do, but also, in the next breath saying, but, we've got you on this one, that's what we're here for. We'll put those hard yards in and make sure that you carry on business as normal, with one or two sort of processes and protocols that you need to fall in line with, but and one or two more expenses, but let's fast forward 6 months and it'll be relatively business as usual in terms of what we do. We just phrase things differently and have one or two different notice periods to cater for in times of need, which is a rarity. So communication probably in short, and knowing your clients, what they are concerned about, listening to what they want information on, and regular contact, not just up to December but thereafter as well, I think will be key to stop people worrying about that first set of communication or press releases that they sort of latch onto and take some negatives from.
No, I think that's a good way to sum up sort of how agents can best support their landlords with it, over the next month or so until the changes do come in, and then thereafter. And obviously, as we discussed at the beginning, and as we sort of touched on throughout, because it's quite difficult to just talk about this legislation without the greater context of what's going on in the economy currently and the effect that that's having. Since we last spoke, since the last podcast that we did together, the cost of living crisis, it has obviously intensified quite a bit. We've had not one but two new prime ministers since we last spoke. Obviously, the mini budgets that came out, and a lot of those measures have since been reversed. I realise it's quite a big question. I mean, how would you say that this has impacted the market, the property market in Wales? Let's ask that open question and see where we go.
That's a big question, isn't it? Well, I think it's not been hugely positive for all the obvious reasons. I think whilst we're getting used to all things December and Renting Homes Wales Act, that current sort of the climate and the uncertainty is exactly that. It's the uncertainty of what do we look to sort of commit to, what do we look towards putting time and effort and finances into, what can and should and would be the case now versus what may not be the case in months to come. So it has definitely sort of made people, prospective landlords, current landlords, expanding landlords looking to downsize or restructure, they're just a little bit more cautious. They want to know what's going to be the case maybe for the next month through November. What's happened as recently as this week, talking on the date we're talking, what does that mean for them in realistic terms, financially? So it is very uncertain, and because it's changed so almost weekly, well, daily, isn't it? We know that in recent weeks, then they haven't got that small bump in the road to sort of overcome and recollect to experience and sort of call upon that. It's all new to us all, and I think it can be a little bit overwhelming. So are things a little more I think our landlords more cautious? Yes. Our tenants a little bit more cautious? Yes, rightly so. And what impact will that have? Not quite sure, if I'm honest with you. We're forecasting and predicting for a set of events so that we can act on it accordingly. As we approach the season, we approach. So as we get to the tail end of the year, things are slightly different from a typical month in the year anyway, for all the obvious reasons, which isn't going to change. So yeah, the current climate has had noticeable effect. More conversations are being had, more questions are being asked by our clients, of us for our thoughts, our experiences. What do we think we should do in their circumstance, with their tenant, with their notice, with their portfolio? Should they carry on looking to purchase property A to add to their portfolio? Is that still a good investment? Should they consider carrying on looking to downsize or exit the market, or in full, or reducing a portfolio of 1, 2, or 3 down to 1 or 2, for example? So we are finding it's encouraging communication, which is great. We are hopefully playing to our strengths and using our knowledge and experience to sort of help point them in a direction we think is right for them, as opposed to right generically. And sort of, I think that's how it will continue. Just sort of that knowledge and the experience and that rapport that we've built and the trust that we've built with the clients that we interact with is probably where we're enjoying that more now, because it's a conversation, and it's footfall in our branch where people are sitting down and talking across, from sofa to sofa or over a desk, where they want that sort of more personable, really sort of involved sort of insight, rather than just an in-passing question during a chain of emails or while we're on the phone. What's your thoughts on? It's more. It's fundamental. It's the most important part at the moment. So it's, we're benefiting from that in terms of we're enjoying it. That's what we're benefiting from. And I think, our retention numbers probably is the outcome of that, as well as some clients that we are now engaging with that we didn't before, that were self-managing, appreciating the involvement of an agent or proactive agent. So, we're taking on small or relatively large portfolios that have been self-managed previously, because they want that reassurance, they want that certainty. And yes, you can argue that's an additional expense that they will be paying in terms of management fees versus previously, not. But, that's good value for money. That return on investment is obviously perceived as a very, very good one. Otherwise, they wouldn't be engaging with us or taking on our services.
It's true that those, as you say, perhaps those landlords that are looking to invest in the long term, if they do intend for that to be the case, then having somebody to advise them throughout it does make sense.
Yeah.
And I do think as well that a lot of what you're saying, it really does draw parallels with the early days of COVID, where communication became the top priority, I think, for most businesses, as a lot of things closed, as a lot of activities kind of slowed down. It obviously gave the time to communicate more with customers. As I say, it's perhaps it does draw parallels with what's happening here, although the industry is obviously very busy at the same time. So I'd say that's probably one of the big differences. How would you compare the situation during COVID-19 and that communication versus now and the situation that we find ourselves in?
There's a lot of similarities, truthfully, in terms of they're both uncharted, within some regards. Nobody could could foresee and knew how to deal with 2020 and 2021 within reason. And safe to say, nobody saw the last 6 or 7 or 8 weeks. So, the immediate impact on that is almost as quick as COVID when that came about in 2020. So that level of conversation or sort of communication quickly for necessity, which needed sort of outcomes and answers within the days ahead, let alone weeks and months ahead, are very similar. And it's just talking about, the things that we're in control of, the things that we can give advice on over the short term, but also looking at the bigger picture in terms of 6 and 12 and 18 months. I think that's the right advice, and the key point that we've become accustomed to now with our clients is looking at the medium to long term, without taking our eye off the 3 or 4 months ahead, looking at the big hurdles that are ahead of us in terms of the utility changes and the sort of the change in that 2-year period over what will now be April, when the assistance comes to an end for most, and mortgage interest rates effectively is obviously a big part of things at the moment. So lots of people are deciding what to do or what not to do. Lots of clients, lots of homeowners, lots of prospective landlords, lots of current landlords are going to find those changes coming about, through the sort of spring and summer months, with noticeable increases as well. So looking at how they impact each other, how that would have a bearing on a prospective tenant or a tenant in situ that is needing to assess, is it financially viable to stay on at that property or not. That level of sort of scrutiny really over each case is important, just to look at a property within a portfolio and then the portfolio as a whole, or for a landlord that's new or thinking of getting to market, what is a very attractive scenario now in terms of no void or tenancy from close to ownership, because it's happening relatively quickly. Very, very high rent and sustainability and affordability may not be the case in 12 months. So let's look at sort of, one or two sort of anomalies that may come about, so that we are prepared for them rather than be caught out by them. So it is going to be a sort of an unusual next 12 months, or 2023 as a calendar year. So given as much insight as we can that we are comfortable with sharing and sort of have some experience of will be important. So and hopefully that's working quite well at the moment.
Obviously, with the just talking about landlords there, I think for tenants too, during COVID versus now as well, I guess there are some differences in terms of their financial situations. Perhaps during COVID, a lot of them perhaps moved in with their parents and were able to save versus now. So I suppose that I think you've already mentioned earlier in our conversation, but it will have that impact on how tenants move, really, how they decide to move and when they decide to move.
Or not in relative terms. So supply and demand is at its lowest still. I think that's a national scenario at the moment. So, you don't have the opportunity to move around as a tenant if you wanted to upsize, downsize, or just for a change of scenery, which is very difficult. So, it's a good time to be a landlord in terms of the void periods, the higher rents, not necessarily a good time to become a landlord in terms of that initial outlay for a property, because the prices are noticeably higher, making that initial return and yield not so attractive. And it's a very difficult time to be a tenant, but also to become a tenant. To be a tenant, the rents are increasing and understandably in some instances, a little bit not so in others, or to become a tenant where you've got so few options, when you've got to really be in a very good, strong, quick position to benefit from that. So yes, what's going to have an impact on a tenant paying the rent versus a landlord paying the mortgage, or homeowner paying the mortgage even, are very similar. 1/3 of the population are renting, 1/3 of the population are owner occupiers in relative terms, and 1/3 are other scenarios. So it's really is important that we sort of look at the bigger picture of that and do what we can for it. We've recently held, the start of the month, we held a free event for investors, but for landlords, self-managing landlords that use agents, not ourselves plus others. There was no, agenda to it, or it was nothing sort of, our brand related, just to give the right advice and just to have people share ideas with like-minded landlords and tenants and agents in that regard. So, that was a great success. There was a lot of people turned out. We had, sort of legal advice there. We had sort of advice from trainers. We had advice from lenders. There was, advice in terms of deposits. There was advice on all sorts of things, to get the landlord market in general sort of understanding. And that was, that was really, really good. We're going to run that on a regular basis now, because we got a lot from that in terms of what we were able to give to clients or self-managing landlords. And you touched earlier on tenants being, equally affected. I totally agree, and sometimes they are thought of as not as affected by certain changes when actually it could affect them more. So we're going to be running events like that for tenants, almost drop-in sort of, events for tenants to come in and talk about their circumstances and how we can help them if they're a tenant of ours, or how we can help them if they're a tenant elsewhere. Looking at lots of alternatives and lots of options, so deposit alternatives, which is great in terms of that initial outlay that tenants don't have to fund, but it also gives landlords an additional set of cover at the end of a tenancy. So that's a clear win-win for both parties. insurance policies, for tenants and landlords, for building and contents or accidental damage or mishaps that we know none of us can foresee. Again, that's, I think, good advice and the right thing for people to do if it's affordable. And rent protection policies, rent guarantee policies that, really do support a landlord and assist a tenant in certain instances, when things do become, really, really difficult in challenging times. So, giving tenants and landlords advice about things that would benefit them, either for free or at a small cost that they pay, not to us, costs of insurances and whatnot, I think is the way forward for the next, 3, 6, 9 months, effectively, because we'll all benefit from that, just being more open and transparent on things that benefit both tenants and landlords.
That's a good list of suggestions there. Perhaps looking at the industry at large, I just wondered what you thought of the concept of the rent freeze. Obviously, they're introducing in Scotland. I think that it's been debated in Wales, and my understanding is that it's been taken off the table for now. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's a solution in this situation?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, I think if that were introduced or thought of in Wales, I think, that would be noticeably detrimental then. Well, I mean, it depends, that blanket approach to it is detrimental. I think it would be a bridge too far in terms of the current climate and what landlords, homeowners, tenants will face through spring and the summer months of that sort of, cost of living and all the associated costs going up noticeably on a monthly basis. So it would be unfair on one aspect in terms of landlords and their increased outgoings that aren't going to completely, put them in the way of a tenant, but they need to strike a balance and will not be able to. So I think it would be, there are far fewer advantages to disadvantages on that. And I think it would just delay what they're trying to avoid. As soon as that rent freeze comes to an end in Scotland, rents will go up very quickly. At the same time, landlords will look to sort of end tenancies, so that, new tenancies, new occupiers can be there for a higher rent rather than a sort of a pro rata or an apportionment of an increase. So, the reason it's put in place, I get it, I understand it. The way it's gone about with the speed of its implementation and it being relatively generic, I don't see there being a great amount of merit in there. I feel for tenants, I genuinely do, because it is very, very difficult, but I think there are better and easier ways to help accommodate them, each case on merit or with other schemes or support that, that the government had done through tough times in recent years could be mirrored in some shape or form. So no, it's not going to be the case here. And I think that's a sensible decision, because it would make life very difficult, more so now for lots of people than it already will be. And it will make for a very difficult period of 2, 3 or 4 months when that, if it came into play, came to a stop, because of what people would then have to act upon, which they haven't been able to for the 12 months prior.
So I think that's a pretty good summary there. And then perhaps just to wrap up our conversation, obviously a lot of what we've discussed, it sort of does look to the future to a certain extent, what landlords can anticipate and how we can help them through this. But would you have any other predictions, any other thoughts as to what 2023 may look like for agents, for landlords? Quite difficult to predict, I suspect, at the minute, but it's worth asking the question as we near the end of the year.
I think it's, looking back in recent years over such big milestones within the industry generally, but here in Wales. So when Rent Smart Wales, came about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when, the all things EPC came into play, tenancy deposit protection, when that came around, they were big differences that we all had to get used to. Lots of that had an impact on agency more than private landlords and tenants in terms of what it meant we had to become involved with or service and prepare ourselves for. Of course, it had an impact on tenants and landlords as well, but maybe the practicality is more so on agents. So I think from a Renting Homes Wales Act, it is difficult. There's a lot going on. It's going to be a long transition, not just December the 1st. If we fast forward 6 months to that sort of June period, I think, will be a sigh of relief from lots of people that we're there. We're used to it, we understand it, and there are advantages to it in terms of increasing the quality and the standard within the sector, of properties, of landlords and tenants. I think that's great. I think next year we'll be impacted from a property industry point of view quite a lot in terms of the cost of living, obviously, and how that pans out. But the likes of the utility, the prices of our gas and electric, and how much that is going to increase, and what options of support there is for that, as well as what interest rates have as an impact on our mortgages or landlord mortgages, because they will not be able to reflect that in the rents that they ask, but they'll have to reflect it or cater for it in some shape or form. And what we don't want to do is have lots of properties come away from the market because landlords are exiting, and therefore that sort of feels that sort of the supply and demand issue. So I think it's good tenants, good properties, and good landlords will as always sort of benefit from these changes. They're there for the right reasons. Longevity of tenancy, proactive approach to sort of communication between tenant, landlord and agents is important. Communication will be more important next year through Q2 and Q3, I think, than historically, in terms of how an agent communicates with a prospective landlord, with a buyer, with an investor looking to sell to a new investor that retains the property within the rental market, and possibly that tenant in situ. That's a key part of communication between agent or department and agent next year as well. So supply and demand isn't going to be hugely different. I think there will be far more tenants than there are properties in one overview. Will there be lots of landlords looking to sort of leave the market? Yes, there will be more than historically. Not a great deal number more because of the points we've talked about already. And then outside factors, like you say, there's going to be the running cost, the cost of living, utilities, and all that revolves around that will have an impact on how you occupy a property, whether you pay rent or pay a mortgage.
I think that those are some pretty good predictions, considering it's very difficult to predict what will come in the coming year. I appreciate those thoughts, and I do think that from our conversation, it's interesting to hear your perspective, not just from the cost of living side of things, which is obviously going to be applicable to all of our agents, wherever they are, England, Scotland, Wales, etc. That's obviously quite a broader, going to impact everybody. Yeah. But it's interesting hearing your perspective in relation to the changes which are coming into play this year. Obviously in England we'll get the renters reform bill soon, so we'll be going through similar changes alongside the cost of living crisis too. So I think that there are definitely things that everybody will be able to take away from this conversation and learn from. So I appreciate the time and talking with you today, Ricky. It's been very interesting.
Oh, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed.